Fallen Angel, A Cross-Security Investigation, Book 1. Written by G.K.Parks. Narrated by Danny Holt. Chapter 10. I stayed at Jade's that night, though she didn't know it. Telling her Scott had gone to the airport and knew she hadn't left the city left her visibly shaken. I downplayed the situation, repeating the things Mr. Almeida had said, but Jade truly believed Scott would kill her. And with the resources of the police department at his disposal, she couldn't just disappear. He'd find her and drag her back, or he'd bury her. That's why she had to take official action. A permanent restraining order would cost him his job, but her request for a TRO would put him on law enforcement's radar. Should anything happen to her, he'd be their prime suspect, and he spent enough years on the force to know it. That might just be her saving grace. It's what we were counting on. But Scott was unpredictable. Drunk or angry, he'd lash out. I saw the unstable moodiness and the concealed rage Scott attempted to hide at the airport, and the way he acted toward Melody, the waitress. Sure, Scott knew how to put on a good front, and most people didn't look too hard. But I wasn't most people. Call it a talent or superpower, but I saw people for who they were, and given how volatile Scott's mood swings were, it could go either way. Unfortunately, Scott left Jade with no other choice, at least none that I could see. Even Mr. Almeida agreed. So here I was, camped out in my car, with a gun on the seat beside me. If someone told me a year ago this is what I'd be doing on a Thursday night, I'd say he was crazy. Now, it didn't seem so crazy. Justin sent me the list of applicants, and I scrolled through their names and qualifications. I needed to hire trained security personnel ASAP. Former military, former law enforcement, former special ops. Each individual was qualified, but I was concerned with why they no longer collected government paychecks. I didn't need to hire anyone unbalanced, but gaining access to psychological evaluations could be difficult. Fortunately, I didn't mind breaking a few rules. Years spent studying computer science afforded me connections to some of the least known and best hackers around. Though I knew creatively coloring outside the lines shouldn't be something I did on a regular basis, this was an emergency. Jade needed a competent and loyal team to guard her until the dust settled, and I needed to have a few teams waiting in the wings for my corporate clients. Hiring 10 tacticians would serve my immediate purposes. I selected the top candidates from the applicant pool and did most of my own research. After weeding out a few questionable characters, I sent the remaining names to a friend, along with the promise of payment in untraceable Bitcoin. I'd have answers by the morning, so I sent a message to my assistant to draft the employment contracts and to have someone from Reeves and Almeida make sure they were airtight. By tomorrow afternoon, Cross Security would finally get off the ground. Finished with that, I reread the tech applications. Personally, I didn't have any qualms with hiring a computer nerd with a nonviolent record, but it could open my company up to liability issues. I didn't need the extra headache. Plus, the best computer whizzes never got caught, and I only wanted to hire the best. However, the best were bright enough to create their own billion-dollar internet startups and didn't need me, and the ones who lacked ambition already had jobs in Silicon Valley. Maybe I would have to go with the second best. Since I didn't have to make a decision right away, I made a note to ask Almeida about ways to indemnify myself from fallout should I hire former hackers to work internet security. When I finished making up for spending the afternoon out of the office, I leaned back in my seat and stared at the apartment building. Most of the lights were off, but I could see one light on in Jade's apartment. Did she fear the dark? I thought about calling and asking if she was okay, but she already had enough men stalking her, so I listened to the radio for a while and stared at the red blip on my phone. Scott's truck was parked at his place. He didn't go to Casey's. That surprised me. I thought he'd want a drink after the day he had, but maybe he was throwing a few back at home. I got out of my car and stretched my legs, stopping by a 24-hour convenience store to grab coffee and a snack. On my way back to the car, my phone chimed. Surprised by the notification, I tripped on the sidewalk, spilling the coffee on my shirt. Shit. Wiping my phone on my pants, I entered my passcode and logged into my Dropbox. A dozen PDF files filled my screen. Thank you, Sarah. I locked my doors, glanced around, and opened Sergeant Scott Renwin's performance evaluation. Scott was a mediocre cop. He did his job, no more, no less. He squeaked by on most things, but Scott's biggest problem, as noted in his evaluation, were his attitude and the number of complaints against him. Opening the file, I read the civilian complaints lodged against him. Excessive force, belligerent, disrespectful. Those 3 phrases repeated themselves over and over. My fingers cramped, and I made the conscious effort to relax my grip on the phone, not realizing how infuriated I had become. The police department knew Scott was an unstable powder keg, but they didn't do anything about it. But I would. After sending copies to Almeida, I called Sarah Rostakowski. Since she just uploaded the PDFs an hour ago, she would be awake. Plus, it was almost dawn, or it would be in a couple of hours. Maybe she was an early riser. Or she picked up a late shift. It didn't matter. I needed to talk to someone. "I didn't think you'd be up," she said. "Is that why you waited so long to send the files?" "No." She sounded remorseful. "It took longer than I thought to access them. They were spread out." "Yeah." I noticed the dates. This had been going on for 3 years, roughly around the same time Jade said Scott first hit her. "Did you find anything from before?" "No." "So you just woke up one day and turned into an asshole?" "It looks that way." "How come no one in the department's done anything about it?" "I don't know. The incidents were evaluated. Scott was reprimanded on a few. On the others, the findings were inconclusive. If I had to guess, he probably doesn't have enough strikes against him." I rubbed my eyes. "That's bullshit. He never hurt anyone. Not to the level the department or city would face penalties, so the brass recommended some anger management and refused to bump up his pay until his performance evaluations improved. That's about it. You know, civilians file false claims all the time." "These aren't false." "Maybe not, but that's why we have union reps. Someone has to protect us from the vindictive assholes." "In this case, your union is protecting a vindictive asshole. Is IA looking into it?" "They are now," Sarah said. I knew she was the cause. "Thanks. They'll be getting a lot more information soon." Chapter 11. "Hey, boss," Justin said when I walked into the office a little after 6 a.m. "What happened to you?" I looked down, remembering the spilled coffee from hours ago. "Remind me to keep a change of clothes at the office." "I'll pick up your dry cleaning in an hour, unless you want to go home and shower. Maybe get some sleep, too." "That can wait." The background checks came back on my potential hires, and I wanted to get the paperwork done. "Here's the list of security personnel I want on the payroll. Let's get the offer letters and contracts drafted and schedule meetings. The sooner the better." I checked the calendar. I had 4 meetings scheduled with prospective corporate clients on Monday, 2 in the morning, a lunch meeting, and 1 in the afternoon. Jade's court appearance was Monday, but Almeida would handle that. "Bring me Amir Karam's application." "But he's a tech expert." "I know that." I stared at Justin, wondering why he suddenly thought he should question me. "Yes, sir." As I perused Mr. Karam's qualifications, I left a voicemail for Almeida. This was the 4th one I left in the last 6 hours, but I had questions, and since I shelled out the attorney's exorbitant retainer fee every month, he would get over it. Last night, I decided I could wait to hire IT experts, since I could do most of the work myself, or source it out without anyone being the wiser. But, in the light of day, with corporate clients on the horizon and being stretched too thin, it couldn't wait. Unlike the other applicants, Amir didn't just have a computer background. He also had a science background, with an emphasis in forensics. The former NSA analyst turned college professor just finished a stint teaching evidence collection and analysis at the FBI Academy in Quantico. He'd be perfect, but when I initially tried to woo him, he wasn't impressed by Cross security. He wanted fancy lab equipment and top-of-the-line technology, not an espresso maker hidden away in what was once a closet turned break room. But maybe I could persuade him to change his mind. At 7, when my receptionist arrived at work, she silently made me a cappuccino, placed it beside me, and went back to her desk. I blinked a few times, rereading the proposal I drafted. It wasn't much, since the only numbers I had to play with were projections based on guesswork. I had no idea how many clients I'd sign, or how much work they'd pass my way. When I embarked on this endeavor, 18 of my former clients expressed an interest in working with Cross Security, but until they signed the paperwork, those were nothing more than hollow promises. Still, it was something to go on. I hit print and handed the paper copy to my receptionist. "Read over this and tell me what you think. Mark any suggestions or changes on here, and I'll look them over." She nodded, just as the phone rang. "Cross Security and Investigations. How may I help you?" I went back to my desk, my eyelids pulsing to the beat of my heart. Almeida hadn't called back yet, but he rarely showed up to work before 9. A few minutes later, the door opened, and one of the men I hoped to hire stepped inside. Spit-shined and sharp, he gave his name to the receptionist. Before he even sat down, I stepped into the doorway, doing my best to appear in charge, despite my coffee-stained shirt, unshaved face, and tired eyes. "Thanks for coming in so quickly. Please." I gestured into my office, and the man followed me inside. Since he showed up before my attorney had time to review the contracts, I considered stalling, but I already appeared unprepared. Waiting would only make it worse. "I'm pleased to extend an offer to you." I handed him the paperwork, relieved when Justin appeared in the doorway with some clean clothes. "I'll give you a few minutes to look over the terms." Getting up, I took my dry cleaning into the tiny bathroom and changed. After changing and combing my hair, I went back into my office and signed the first member of my security team. Just 9 more to go. Almeida phoned around 9:30 to say the contracts were solid, which was a relief since I had already signed 2 of my new employees while I waited for him to get out of bed and get to work. My assistant made miracles happen. Admittedly, it didn't hurt that these former military types routinely woke up at 5 a.m. for the hell of it. As soon as my prospective new hires received Justin's call, they headed to my office. Why didn't everyone behave this way? Patience, Lucien. Aside from the contracts being solid, Almeida also said he needed more time to review Scott Renwin's files, but he wanted to subpoena Renwin's records to keep things official and above board, particularly now that he knew doing so would be worthwhile. "Great," I said. "Have you spoken to any of the people who filed complaints against Sergeant Renwin?" "Not yet. It was on my list of things to do, somewhere between getting a team ready for on-the-job training and catching some Z's." "All right, when you do, let me know. Proceedings like this don't require witnesses, but I like to be prepared." "That's why I like you." "That's why? I thought it was because I saved your ass from serving hard time." "You aren't my only phone-a-friend," but that didn't hurt either. "Cross," Almeida said, "do you have any idea what triggered Renwin's change in behavior?" "Not yet, though it was another thing on my to-do list. I'll ask Jade if she remembers what happened around the time he changed. Most times, a break like that would be caused by a traumatic event, maybe a death. Scott's unresolved issues with dear old Dad could have manifested in the son turning into his father. But I didn't want to speculate, nor did I care. What turned Scott into a monster wasn't my fault, or my job to figure out, or fix. My only concern was keeping him away from Jade. The police department would have to figure out a way to keep him away from the general public. That was beyond the scope of my capabilities. Hanging up, I opened my office door and invited the next future cross-security employee inside. He had just signed on the dotted line when my receptionist came to the door. She knew not to disturb me unless it was urgent. "What is it?" I asked her. "Miss McNamara's on the phone. She said the cops are outside her door." Chapter 12. I raced to Jade's, leaving Justin in charge of the contract negotiations. He knew how far I was willing to go to sign these men and women, but it made me itchy not handling it myself. It was my name on the line. This was Cross Security and Investigations, and I was Lucien fucking Cross. But none of that mattered right now. Driving past the apartment building, I noted the 2 patrol cars parked near the front door. No lights, no sirens. I wrote down their cruiser numbers, found the closest space a block away, and jogged back to Jade's building. Entering the code, I stepped inside. It took time for my eyes to adjust to the dim hallway, and I nearly tripped on the stairs. I didn't have a plan. I couldn't even remember if I grabbed my wallet on the way out. My carry permit and PI license were inside. I'd need them if things went south. I burst onto Jade's floor, the stairwell door banged against the wall, and a uniformed officer turned to look in my direction. His hand rested on his holster, but his posture didn't appear threatening. He offered a tight smile and nodded. I returned the gesture and went past him down the hall to Jade's apartment, noticing his partner speaking to a man inside the apartment. Without knocking, I slipped my copy of the key into the lock and turned the knob. "Hey, it's Lucien," I called, pulling the door closed behind me and relocking the door. "Jade? Hello?" Her things remained in the corner of the room, but I didn't see her. Reaching into my pocket, I pulled out my phone and dialed her new number. I waited, listening. A moment later, the annoying, high-pitched melody played. "Jade!" I tried again. "Are you in here? It's only me. I didn't mean to barge in." I glanced out the window in case she decided to take her chances on the ledge. Where could she be? I cleared my throat. "Ahem! Jade?" The car keys remained on the kitchen counter. Knocking on the bedroom door, I waited a second before twisting the knob. It was locked, which could only be done from the inside. She had to be here. I knocked louder. Still nothing. A sick thought twisted my stomach in knots. What if he found her? What if he locked the 2 of them in her bedroom? Maybe the cops in the hallway were his lookouts. "Jade!" I said more frantically, though the volume of my voice remained low. I didn't want anyone outside the apartment to hear what was going on. It's why I didn't knock on the door before letting myself in. I turned around and mule-kicked the door. The cheap lock gave way under the force, and I pulled my gun and stepped into the bedroom. She didn't scream. Why didn't she scream? I swept the room. No one was here, but I heard a whimper coming from the bathroom. Oh, God. For a moment I thought I might have a heart attack. Sweat coated my skin, dripping into my eyes. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. Another strangled whine came from inside, making me forget everything. The sound grabbed me, and I shouldered my way through the locked bathroom door, gun aimed. Her teal eyes went wide. Tears dripped down her face, and she pressed both her hands even harder against her lips, muffling the surprised scream. I looked around, barely able to breathe. She eased one of her hands off her mouth, fighting not to sob. "Whoa, hey," I said, seeing the gun in my hands and realizing it shouldn't be there. Tucking it into my holster, I held up my palms, which shook. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to point the gun at you. I won't hurt you, you know that. I didn't mean to startle you. My receptionist gave me your message, and when I tried calling back, you didn't answer. I didn't know what happened. I thought—" She trembled, biting her fist to muffle her shrieks and sobs. I looked around the bathroom. I didn't know what happened or why she locked herself inside. At the moment, nothing made sense. Dropping to my knees beside the tub, I rested my elbow on the ledge and took a few deep breaths. By the time Jade calmed down, my heart rate had dropped to something that probably wouldn't even register on a monitor. People always accused me of being heartless. Maybe this was why. She sniffled and wiped her eyes, still shaky. "What are they doing here?" "Who?" "The police." She swallowed, wincing, her throat sore from the sobs and screams. "They knocked on my door and asked if I'd seen a man. They wanted to know if I was alone. They wanted to come inside." "Did you recognize them? Are they Scott's friends?" "I don't know. I was so scared." She placed her hand on the tub ledge, and I inched mine forward until it brushed against hers. She stretched her fingers out and took my hand. "I told them I didn't know anything and had something on the stove so they couldn't come in. After that," the tears fell silently, "I just hid in the tub, like I always do when Scott's on a tear. He's like a tornado." "So you take cover in the tub," I teased. "Makes sense." She laughed, probably from nerves. "It's stupid, but I figured they'd tell him I was here. I thought by hiding in the bathtub he wouldn't be able to find me." I'm sorry. I stood, reaching down to help her out of the tub, though my own legs wobbled. I didn't mean to scare you. You didn't answer your phone, and I didn't want to attract unnecessary attention by knocking on your door. Why didn't you answer when I called your name? I didn't hear you. Just the bedroom door slamming. Another thing Scott does frequently. She scowled, stepping out of the tub. The soles of her sneakers squeaked as she slipped on the tile. Automatically, I enveloped her in my arms to stop her from falling, and she tensed. I'm sorry. I'm so clumsy. Don't apologize. Never apologize. She pushed against my chest. In that case, let go. She didn't like to be touched. I slowly released her, making sure her footing was stable. Most accidents happen in the bathroom. Let's get out of here so I can figure out what's going on without having to worry about one of us falling and breaking our neck. We went back into the living room, and I peered through the peephole. The police officers had moved on to another apartment. They were canvassing the building. I just didn't know why. It made me uneasy. Stay here. I'll be right back. She swallowed, aghast at the prospect, but managed to say, Okay. I buttoned my jacket and opened the door. Excuse me, I said to the officer who acknowledged me earlier. Do you mind if I ask what's going on? My roommate said you dropped by to ask her about a man. The officer nodded and flashed a photo in my direction. An hour ago, this man broke into the ATM down the street. Eyewitnesses say they thought they saw him enter one of these apartment buildings. Have you seen him? I looked at the photograph, a blown-up image from the ATM's surveillance camera. No, sir. I was at work. Yeah, I figured as much. With the buzzer on the door, I bet he entered the other apartment building, but we have to be thorough. In case you see him, please call 911 and let them know. Absolutely. Chapter 13. Did you give them your name? I asked. No, of course not. Good. I tapped my phone against the table. And you didn't recognize either of them? Jade shook her head. Okay. Let me make a few calls and see if dispatch received reports and sent the 2 patrol units to check it out. How are you going to do that? Jade asked. I smirked. Magic. Sarah Rostakowski wasn't my only friend in the department. I had several, even a few in dispatch. After verifying the details, I hung up and peered out the window. An evidence collection van parked down the street, and another 2 blue and whites arrived to rope off the area surrounding the ATM. The call appeared legit. Lucien, I'm sorry I bothered you. Confused, I turned to look at her. You have no reason to apologize. Returning to the front door, I peered out the peephole, but the hallway was quiet. Cautiously, I opened the door, poked my head out, looking both ways. The police officers were gone. They might be on another floor, or they left the building. It's just bad luck, or bad timing. I locked the door. They weren't looking for you. Are you sure? As sure as I can be. I pointed out the window. This is far too elaborate a ploy for Scott to have concocted. She nodded a few times, hugging her arms around her body. Yeah, you're right. Do you want some tea? I rummaged through the kitchen. If I didn't get caffeine inside of me soon, I'd hit the floor. I flexed my fingers against the residual tremor from the adrenaline dump. Or a glass of water? Maybe a Valium. She laughed, realizing the last was a joke. It might have been the first time I heard her laugh in amusement, not from nerves or sarcasm. Is pushing pills your side hustle? No, though I might consider it in the future. My mind circled back to today's appointments and contract negotiations. Opening the container of coffee pods, I put one in the brewer and shoved a mug beneath it. Coffee? She shook her head. That's the last thing I need. Dropping into a chair, she pulled her knees to her chest, looking down at the red marks on her hand from her own teeth. I really thought he found me. You must think I'm crazy. The machine let out a hiss, and I picked up the steaming mug. No, but he might be. Pulling out the chair beside her, I sat down. It turns out Scott's been unstable for a while now. Do you remember anything happening to him around the time he first hit you? Maybe someone died, his dad or someone at work. She stared at the light blue cup in my hand. His dad passed away before we got together. He mentioned it once, but I don't think he really cared. They weren't close. Do you know if he abused Scott?
I don't know. Is that why he's like this? I would think if you dealt with something like this as a kid, you'd never treat someone like that since you know how terrible it is.
I don't know. The statistics make it appear the chances are more likely, but you'd have to ask a psychologist. Jade nodded.
Yeah, I know. One of my professors was a prison psychologist. She explained it, backed it by studies and everything, but I never understood.
That's probably a good thing. It means you're normal. She snorted.
I don't know what your life is like, Lucien, but this isn't normal.
At least you recognize that. I smiled and sipped my coffee. She derailed my line of questioning, so I tried again. What about other traumatic events in Scott's life? Jade thought for a while.
Something happened at work 3 years ago. I don't remember all the details, but Scott got called to a scene. I remember because we went to a funeral a week later. The responding officers had been killed.
Did they catch the guy?
I thought they did, but...
She chewed on her fingernail.
Scott moped around the house for a couple of weeks after that. Then he started drinking a lot more.
Is that around the first time he hit you? She nodded. All right. I regretted my words, cringing. It's not all right, but...
I know what you meant.
She picked up my empty coffee cup and washed it in the sink.
Why does any of this matter?
Mr. Almeida wanted to know Scott's history. It might be relevant information he needs for the hearing. From the silence that ensued, I knew Jade had reservations. But I didn't push. Almeida explained to her why this was important. Scott didn't leave her a choice. She needed to do something to keep him away, and unfortunately, a court order was the best our society had to remedy the situation. I should get back to the office. Glancing down at my sweat-stained and wrinkled shirt, I sighed. This time I'd stop at home to shower and change. Apparently, I needed to keep a few sets of clothes in the office. Who knew private investigator work would require this much dry cleaning?
Do you have to go?
She spun away from the sink, fear in her eyes. I can get you set up in another apartment or take you to a hotel if that would make you feel safer. Though hotels and motels would be some of the first places Scott would check after he finished searching the shelters and rescues.
No, you've done enough,
she swallowed.
Maybe I could come with you. I don't want to be alone right now.
Let me call the office. Assuming Justin has everything under control, I can probably stick around for a little while and work from here.
Yeah?
Yeah. This was a bad idea, but I was tired and stressed and didn't want any repeats of this morning, and since I knew Scott was desperate to find her, if Jade called a second time, I'd rush right over and break down the door again. Chapter 14.
Lucien.
I forced one eyelid to lift, and then the other.
It's morning. Do you have to go to work?
What? I blinked and sat up. Empty takeout containers littered the coffee table. Grabbing my phone, I checked the time. 9 a.m. Shit, I never sleep this late.
Thanks for staying.
Jade popped another pod into the coffee maker and pressed the button.
Do you want some coffee?
Yes, thanks. I rubbed a hand through my hair and stumbled to the bathroom. I spent the entire day working from Jade's couch since the incident with the police left her rattled. Admittedly, it rattled me too, though I wasn't entirely sure why. But I could see it on my face. I looked like hell. 2 days without a shower or shaved left me ripe and looking a little bit homeless. Yesterday afternoon, Justin brought the signed contracts over. Cross Security signed 12 of the 14 candidates I selected, which was 2 more than I thought we'd get, and 4 more than we needed. Unfortunately, they didn't start until Monday, and I didn't know any of the security specialists well enough to trust them to watch Jade, who was leery of everyone, even me. She kept her distance from Justin when he brought the files, and then returned with the takeout. He and I went over the day's details and meetings while eating Chinese and sitting on the couch. But even though I came rushing to her rescue, Jade kept her distance, even circling around to avoid walking near us. I couldn't thrust an unknown bodyguard on her, unless she'd be more comfortable with one of the 2 women I hired. That was a possibility we'd have to discuss at a future date. I stepped out of the bathroom. Did Justin offend you?
No, he's been great.
I picked up the mug and took a sip. Testing out my theory, I reached for the milk beside her hand. and she withdrew. That bastard Scott really did a number on you. She met my eyes but didn't respond. We stood in the kitchen, drinking coffee in silence. I had too much to do. I shouldn't have slept on the couch. I could barely believe I fell asleep or slept as long as I did. Gulping down the rest, I put my mug in the sink. I'll see about getting the bedroom and bathroom doors fixed, though I'd have to be careful if I sourced out the work. It looked like someone broke in, and that would draw undue attention. The last thing any of us wanted were more cops snooping around. Are you okay?
Yes.
Okay. I grabbed my jacket off the hanger and slipped it on to conceal my holster. I'll see you later. After showering, I felt better, more human. So I went to the office. My receptionist had the weekends off, but Justin was hard at work. He was a godsend, the only bright light from my time on Wall Street. He'd been an intern, my intern. When I suspected my boss of embezzling, Justin helped me get access to the files. The SEC didn't know about his involvement. He could have stayed and become a trader or investment banker or whatever it was he originally intended. But people talk, rumors spread, and even though no one had any proof he helped me, they suspected it and blackballed him, too. So I owed him, and after these last few days, I really owed him.
Do you think she's safe?
He asked, not looking up from the computer screen. As safe as she can be.
Even with the police sniffing around?
I slapped a copy of today's paper on his desk. The ATM robbery got a tiny photo beneath the fold. The reason for their lurking looks legit. It was just bad timing.
Do you want to move her somewhere else? I found a few alternative locations.
Maybe after the court proceedings. It'll depend on how things play out. I went into my office. Right now, we have more pressing matters. And I couldn't keep shelling out cash. Opening my presentation files, I reviewed the details about my prospective clients and tailored each presentation to fit their needs. I needed paying customers before I bankrupted my personal savings while trying to get things off the ground. Signing a big name would solve most of my problems. Once I had a steady income stream, I could hire men like Amir Karam and expand. The first thing I'd do would be move out of this office. Image was everything, and this place wouldn't impress a cockroach. When I locked down each of my 4 presentations, I reread the jackets on my new hires. My 12 new employees would report to work Monday morning. Thankfully, I already had an employee handbook and crisis manual ready to go. I even paid a few $1,000 to have a set of training videos prepared, and I hired a retired Secret Service agent to conduct the training sessions and set up a few obstacle courses and drills. But I hoped this would be nothing more than a refresher course for them. Bodyguard work required a particular skill set, which they already possessed, but with a few tweaks. 6 of the men had previous experience in private security and came highly recommended. Everything should run smoothly, though I never expected anything to ever run smoothly. By the time I finished getting everything set up, it was dark. Justin left 3 hours ago. It was time I did the same. Before heading home, I stopped by the hardware store, picked up some supplies to fix the doors, and headed to Jade's. Last night, she stayed in the bedroom while Justin and I worked in the living room. Tonight, she stayed in the living room while I worked in the bedroom. After replacing the doorknob with a new one that had a much better lock, I hammered in the loose parts of the door frame. Hopefully, the landlord wouldn't pay too much attention, since I hoped to get my security deposit back. The bathroom was easier to fix since the door jamb remained intact. The lock on that door was so cheap the internal mechanism gave out under the pressure, so I replaced that doorknob too. Wiping my hands on a towel, I glanced around. Jade hadn't unpacked anything. The only items on the counter were things I ordered for the apartment. "Do you need anything else?" I asked. Jade looked up from her copy of People magazine.
No.
But I saw the fear in her eyes. I took a step back, dropping the hammer and screwdriver into the plastic bag. Once they were out of sight, she visibly relaxed. The only thought in my head was Scott Renwin was a piece of shit. The police department knew it, but they didn't do a damn thing about it. And tonight, I'd find out why. Chapter 15.
"Hey, you aren't supposed to be in here,"
the officer said. I turned, automatically lifting my hands to waist height so he'd know I wasn't armed. Slowly, I removed the flashlight from my mouth. You're right.
Let's go, buddy.
He jerked his chin toward the door.
How did you get in here?
I chuckled, stepping away from the dark shelves and into the light. It wasn't too hard. I recognized him, though I didn't recall his name.
You're...
Yep. I cleared my throat, the lie already prepared. My father said he had some files and records pulled for me, but when I checked his office, they weren't there. Someone forgot to do it. I thought I'd just grab them myself since I didn't want to make a fuss and get anyone in trouble. I stepped closer, compliant and friendly. I guess we better call him and get this straightened out. The officer didn't like that idea.
Maybe I can help you find them. It's late. We don't need to inconvenience him.
I held the smile, though my thoughts went dark. I doubted anything could inconvenience him more than my existence. Are you sure?
No problem. What are you looking for?
So, I told him. If the officer was suspicious why I needed access to Sergeant Renwin's case files and evaluations from 3 years ago, he didn't act like it. Instead, he went to the terminal in the corner and typed in the request. Unfortunately, the files weren't digitized. I already looked. You know, I said as he went in search of the box on the shelf, I helped design that system. I jerked my chin at the computer. It was a few years ago, right after I graduated college, but before signing up for the police academy, back when I thought being a cop was the greatest thing in the world. A lot had changed, but the back door I created into the system had not, though it hadn't helped me access any of the information I needed on Scott, since performance reports and evaluations weren't stored digitally.
How old were you?
The officer reached for a box beside the one I had been searching.
You must have been a kid.
I laughed. Thanks, but I'm not that much of a prodigy. Spotting the department's psychologist's notes in the box I had abandoned, I kept my eyes on the officer's back while I carefully reached inside and slipped the notes into my jacket pocket without him noticing.
And your father still has you running errands for us?
The officer pulled out a few files and handed them to me.
He should put you on the payroll.
Who says I'm not? I teased, though I had to work hard to keep my fists from clenching and my jaw from tightening. I stared down at the files until I was sure my poker face was back in place. Seems light. I hefted the stack.
We didn't have much to go on from that incident.
He glanced down.
The Sarge caught a tough break with that one. Is this for a commendation or something?
Yeah, but keep it quiet.
Will do.
Instead of taking the files and signing them out, I said I just needed to verify a few details, and when the officer wasn't looking, I snapped photos of each of the pages, returned the files to the box, and left without another word. That could have gone better, but I wasn't in cuffs, so I shouldn't complain. Safely inside my car, I checked the GPS tracker to make sure Scott was home. Then I drove to Jade's, pushed my seat back, and spread the shrink's file out on the dashboard. I had work to do. I just didn't know where to begin. The incident, as the officer referred to it, occurred over 3 years ago. A liquor store holdup went south. The owner and 2 customers were shot and killed. Sergeant Renwin arrived first on the scene. According to the report, he was inside the store when a second unit arrived. Shots were fired, killing a rookie officer and his T.O. Renwin failed to notice the shooter had ducked down a nearby alleyway to count his score. Renwin chased the suspect and apprehended him 2 blocks from the original scene, but the suspect had tossed the gun somewhere along the way, and the sergeant didn't notice when this happened and failed to mention it in his report. When the weapon was recovered, the police couldn't positively link it back to the shooter. The DA's office rushed the case through since 2 cops and 3 civilians had been slain, but the grand jury failed to indict. Once released, the shooter committed a home invasion, killing a tender-aged child, before being brought down by responding officers. Even though the department didn't find Renwin at fault for the officers' deaths, he was required to attend mandated counseling sessions. This was the tipping point, the traumatic incident, the thing that turned the man into a monster. But the shrink signed off, saying Renwin was fit to return to active duty. However, after the home invasion, Renwin became violent and belligerent, blaming himself for the child's death. His commanding officers suggested anger management, but Renwin refused. No matter how hard he denied it, deep down, Renwin knew the truth. He was angry at himself and the world. Instead of finding a healthy outlet, he drank more and more, and one day, that wasn't enough. So he started knocking around the dirt bags he arrested. But it still wasn't enough. Eventually, he turned that internal hatred outward and focused it on the one person who loved him. Jade. I dropped the file to the seat and stared out the windshield, a little nauseous and unsettled by the revelation. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe Renwyn just liked to beat up the weak as indicated by his perceived inferiority complex. Either way, I found the one helpful piece of information I hoped we'd find. His commanding officer wrote a note in Renwyn's file, indicating the sergeant refused to go to anger management. That meant the department knew Renwyn had a problem and was a ticking time bomb. It might not be proof that Renwyn hit Jade, but it came pretty damn close. It would be enough. Almeida would take that one fact and build a rock-solid case. Chapter 16. I kept sneaking quick peeks at my watch. The hearing should be underway. Did Scott Renwyn show up in person? Did he have counsel? Toying with my phone, I checked the tracker's location. According to this, Scott's truck was parked at the precinct. Maybe he couldn't get the day off. Or maybe he drove a cruiser to court. The bastard might have shown up in full police regalia in hopes of swaying the judge's opinion. I wouldn't put it past him.
Mr. Cross?
I blinked and clicked to another slide. As I was saying, data breaches could have catastrophic repercussions. Luckily, my carefully crafted notes and detailed presentation got my mind back on track. I didn't even finish going through the slides before my first official cross-security client signed the contract.
I don't need to see anything else. Your investments in tips made me millions. I trust you. If you say this is what needs to be done to safeguard my company and assets, I say let's do it.
Okay, great. My assistant will schedule the initial review and consultation, and we'll take it from there. We shook hands, concluding my second meeting of the day. The first one didn't go nearly as well. My potential client wanted to review the information and present it to his partners before signing the contract. Still, I got the impression it was a strong maybe and not an overt no. After my second appointment left, Justin stepped into my office.
We got one. Is it too early to start celebrating?
He held up a bottle of scotch. No, but I better not come back from lunch to find you sloshed. Don't forget our final appointment is this afternoon with Miranda. I straightened my tie and buttoned my jacket. Did you order a car?
Yes, it's waiting downstairs.
Excellent. I dug the phone out of my pocket, but I didn't have any messages. Hold down the fort while I'm gone.
Yes, sir.
And save me a glass of scotch.
Will do.
I slipped inside the town car, glad to have a few moments of quiet before we picked up Mr. Rathbone on our way to the restaurant. I needed the time to rehearse my next presentation. Since Rathbone had an army of private security and a trusted board who kept his company up to date with the times, he didn't want cross-security to pitch him new ideas or protections. He wanted me to evaluate his security measures and personnel, find weaknesses, and eliminate them. Despite his grandfatherly exterior, Rathbone was the most cutthroat and ruthless man I'd ever met, and he wanted me to excise any malignancies with precision and ease. The car picked him up outside his office skyscraper. Maybe I should have gotten a limo instead of a town car, but the idea seemed too ostentatious at the time. Now I wasn't sure. We made small talk until we arrived at the restaurant. Once there, Rathbone ordered a steak, bloody, and a bottle of red wine. I followed suit, launching into my pitch while he sliced through the meat with zeal. Around our second bottle of wine, Rathbone and I reached a gentleman's agreement, shaking on the deal. His legal department would review the contract. If they required any amendments, they'd reach out to my legal department, which at the moment was Mr. Almeida, and let him know. Cross-security had arrived. We finished the bottle, and the car took Rathbone back to his office before dropping me off at mine. I tipped the driver more than I should, on account of my good fortune. Rathbone wanted background checks on every employee, and he employed thousands. Working for him could keep us afloat for months, even if no other clients came in. But I knew they would. This was just the beginning. My afternoon appointment showed up a half hour early, surprising me. Miranda didn't want to listen to my presentation. She was looking for a security detail to accompany her while touring. After checking the dates to make sure my new hires had ample time to complete the training, I told her it wouldn't be a problem, and she signed on the dotted line. "What about your manager in the studio?" I asked. "Don't they usually hire the help?" She laughed. "Obviously, you haven't been following my career, or the shake-up in the music biz." "Sorry, I've been a little busy." She eyed me up and down. "I'll bet." Come on, Miranda. When I first struck gold, my boss brought me in to assist on diversifying Miranda's portfolio, but she'd taken a liking to me and made it clear I was the only one who could handle her assets. "You know how much work I've put into this?" "I do. Why do you think I took this meeting?" "You missed me." "That too." She held out her hand, and I brought it to my lips. "You know, I can make room on the tour for one more. I'd let you coordinate my security any day." "But who would run all this? I can't just dump it in Justin's lap." "Sure you could." She leaned across my desk and brushed her lips against my cheek. "Just think about it." "Absolutely." She gave me a cockeyed look and sashayed out the office, blowing a kiss to Justin and telling my receptionist to keep an eye on the two of us men. I dropped into my chair, elated. Opening my spreadsheet, I updated the projections. Perhaps we'd actually get into the black by our second quarter. As soon as that happened, I could start expanding. More employees, additional advertising, updated services. The possibilities left me giddy. Or it was the heady mix of perfectly aged wine, Miranda's intoxicating perfume, and the dollar signs dancing in front of my eyes. The outer office door opened, and for a moment I wondered if Miranda had forgotten something. But I didn't hear her gentle lilt. Instead, I heard a deep, raspy voice. "Take a seat. I'll see if he's busy." My receptionist knocked on my door before stepping inside. "Mr. Cross, we have a walk-in. Do you want me to ask him to make an appointment?" "No, that's okay. Send him in." "Yes, sir." She exited, leaving the door open. "Right through here." I closed my spreadsheet and stuck Miranda's contract inside my drawer. I had already signed 3 new clients. Maybe this would be lucky number 4. But I was dead wrong. It took every ounce of self-control to keep the impassive, professional look on my face.
"Mr. Cross?"
He extended his hand, and I stood to shake it.
"I'm looking for my girlfriend. She's gone missing. I was hoping you could help me find her."
Chapter 17. "How long has she been missing?" I asked, playing along. "Have you spoken to the police?"
"They can't help me."
Scott sat back in the chair, his expression unreadable. I thought I had him pegged the first time I laid eyes on him. He wore his emotions on his sleeve, but now he was calm. Too calm. I searched his eyes for a moment before busying myself with checking my drawers for a pad of paper. He must have taken something to seem calm and sedate. "Tell me about her, Mr.—" I waited. 2 could play at this game.
"Biggs. Leonard Biggs."
I nodded, wondering why he used a fake name. Could this be a coincidence? Did Scott Renwyn have a doppelganger? My gut said no. Scott stared at me, squinting for a moment before rubbing his eyes. Did he recognize me from our brief encounter in the airport parking garage? It didn't matter. He knew who I was. That's why he came here. He knew I stashed Jade somewhere, and he intended to find out where. "Tell me about her. What's her name? When did she go missing?" He pulled a photograph of Jade out of his pocket and placed it on my desk. He remained focused entirely on me.
"Jade McNamara. She left about a week ago."
I lifted the photo and leaned back in my chair, aware of the weight of his stare. "Left?" I put the photo down and met his eyes. Ice ran through my veins. I wouldn't give away anything. Not to a prick like him.
"A family member fell ill."
"So you know where she is?" My brows knit together. "What's the problem?"
"It's a lie."
The anger ignited in his eyes and coursed through his body, but he swallowed it away.
"She doesn't have an Aunt Bonnie."
"Huh?" I steepled my fingers and tapped them against my chin. "Have you spoken to her?" Maybe you misheard what she said. Bad connection?
We haven't spoken. I found a note in our apartment. Her things were gone. She won't answer her phone. I tried calling it several times, but nothing. She just disappeared.
Do you suspect foul play? Something disconcerting flickered in his eyes.
Yes.
In that case, you need to contact the police or the FBI.
I don't think any of us wants that.
He let the threat hang in the air.
Missing persons cases can be tough to crack. The police have hundreds, maybe thousands to solve. They don't have time for this. I don't have time for this. That's why I thought hiring a private investigator would be better, faster, more to the point.
I hate to say it, but you've come to the wrong place. I'm not much of a private investigator. I specialize in corporate security.
Oh.
Scott didn't move or budge. He just stared with those fiery eyes.
Are you sure you won't make an exception? I'm prepared to pay whatever you want.
I didn't like this game. Scott knew I was involved in Jade's disappearance. I didn't know how, but he did. And he concocted this tale to find out where I stashed her. Maybe he thought he could buy me off. What do you do for a living, Mr. Biggs?
Why does that matter?
I was just wondering how much you're willing to pay to get her back. He stared at me, a cross between smug self-assuredness and a burning desire to break every bone in my body.
I'll do whatever it takes.
That answer worried me. Do you think someone abducted Ms. McNamara? I wasn't sure what other private investigators would say under these circumstances, but I didn't think many of them would be stupid enough to find themselves in this situation. Still, kidnapping made a lot of sense based on the bullshit Scott spewed, though I'd just seen Taken, so that might have had something to do with it. If you're reasonably well off, this could be a ransom situation. Once again, I urge you to go to the authorities. Scott laughed bitterly.
Are you for real?
As real as you are. Like I said, I deal with corporate clients. Kidnapping and ransoms are commonplace in their world. I narrowed my eyes. But probably not in yours.
No.
What do you do for a living? I tried again, hoping to confuse Scott into thinking I was too clueless to be involved. Unfortunately, he wasn't as stupid as he looked. Scott thought for a moment.
I work construction.
Nice, I thought. That would explain the truck. So it's not a kidnapping and ransom, but you still think she was taken against her will? I picked up the photograph of Jade, fighting to maintain the cold detachment as the ice in my veins melted and boiled.
I just want to find her. I have to find her. She gets confused. She doesn't realize she needs me to take care of her.
I picked up my pen. Does she have any diagnosed medical or psychological conditions?
No, but...
But what?
She can't take care of herself.
Why not?
She just can't.
I wrote Jade's name on the first line and put the alias Scott gave me in the top corner of the pad, just for something to do. This sounds like a difficult burden to bear. Are you sure you want to keep doing this?
Of course. I love her.
I stopped writing and stared at him. Be honest, Mr. Biggs. Do you think something happened to her? Or do you think she left you? He glared at me. Whatever sedative he took wasn't enough to completely extinguish the rage.
The only reason she'd ever leave me is if someone talked her into it.
And Scott knew he was staring at that someone. But I remained cool. Any idea who's responsible?
No, but I intend to find out.
He watched me closely.
And when I do, that person's going to pay.
We stared at one another warily. He knew, I knew. But he didn't break from the charade.
I'm prepared to do this with or without your help, but I imagine things will work out better for all of us with your help.
Finally, I broke eye contact, painting a pleasant business smile on my face. All right, sure. Tell me about Jade. Where does she work? I need a list of friends, family, anyone you believe she might confide in. Her phone number, email address, whatever contact information you have. I slid the paper and pen across the desk. While you fill that out, let me grab a contract. It's $500 a day, plus expenses. Will that be a problem?" He dropped the pen onto the desk.
"Let's cut to the chase. Why don't you give me a nice round figure instead?"
"Sorry, I don't know how long it'll take to locate her, and results aren't guaranteed." Stood, his fists clenched, the veins bulging in his wrists and forearms. Maybe he'd hit me, and we'd put this entire thing to rest right now. But he didn't.
"Just think about it, and let me know when you change your mind."
He placed something on the pad of paper and left the office. I looked down, recognizing the GPS tracker I'd left on his rear bumper. Shit. Chapter 18. "Justin, call the exterminator. Tell him I need the office swept for bugs." My assistant looked up, knowing not to question me.
Okay.
I turned to the receptionist. "We might have bed bugs. I thought I saw one crawling around near the baseboards, so until we know for sure, you might as well stay home. I'll let you know once the office has been cleared, and thank you for doing such a wonderful job today." She gave me an odd look.
Sir?
"Go on." I nodded at the door. "And if anyone bothers you, let me know." She knew something odd had happened, but didn't question me. After collecting her belongings and wishing us a good night, she left the office. Every fiber in my body said I had to check on Jade, but that's what Scott would expect. So I didn't make any calls or leave work. Since he found the tracker I planted and left it in my office, there was no question he was on to me. And without being able to monitor his movements, I'd have to take extra precautions. How did he find the tracker and discover my connection to Jade? It didn't make sense. 30 minutes later, the exterminator, an IT expert who specialized in locating surveillance equipment, checked my office. He didn't find anything, but to be on the safe side, he and Justin checked our servers and network to make sure there hadn't been any data breaches. We were clear. Scott wasn't an evil genius. He was just angry, which made him dangerous.
"Phones are clear, too,"
the exterminator said. "Thanks, but I didn't risk making a call. The police could tap the line. I'd have to get a burner. Actually, we should probably keep some of those stocked at the office." I added it to my list of things to consider in the future. Scott Renwind had turned my fledgling business on its head, and I didn't like it. He'd regret it. I'd make sure of it.
"Boss,"
my assistant said, worry etching his boyish features.
"Who was that guy?"
"That's the bastard Jade ran away from."
"And he came here to ask for your help?"
"He came to threaten me." I blew out a breath. "Look, I need you to keep on top of our new hires. Do a little digging and make sure Scott didn't reach out to any of them. I doubt he did, but it doesn't hurt to make sure. After that, monitor their training. Keep me updated on how that goes, and steer clear of the office until this blows over. Do what you can from home, and watch out for tails or anything suspicious. You see anything, especially a ridiculously oversized truck, you report it."
"But he's a cop."
"It doesn't matter. You work for me. The police will keep you safe, even from one of their own." Ignoring the questioning look on Justin's face, I grabbed my gun and credentials from my desk drawer, along with the freshly signed contracts, and rode the elevator to the lobby. A police cruiser remained parked on the other side of the street. Renwin was a piece of work, but he'd learn I wasn't a defenseless schmuck he could intimidate or push around. Since he wanted to wage war, I'd bring the war to him. I didn't go to my car. Instead, I walked a few blocks to the nearest subway station and descended the stairs. While I waited on the platform, I caught sight of Scott in my periphery, doing his best to remain hidden behind a pillar. When the train arrived, I entered the open doors and headed toward the other end of the car. As soon as I glimpsed Scott enter, I found a spot to stand near the back, next to a second set of doors, and waited for the telltale chime alerting passengers the doors were closing. Then I darted out, turning to see Scott stuck inside the sealed train car. Since he found the tracker I planted, I feared he might have reciprocated, so I left my car parked outside the office and took a cab to Reeves and Almeida. I had a million questions. Mr. Almeida better be able to answer them.
"Mr. Cross?"
The secretary put the phone down. "I need to see him, now." I didn't even slow as I moved past her desk towards Almeida's corner office.
"Wait!"
She hurried after me, her heels clicking frantically against the tile floor. I pulled open Almeida's door. Thankfully, the attorney wasn't in a meeting with a client. "We need to talk. What the hell happened today?" Almeida looked up at the sudden interruption. His gaze came to rest on the frazzled woman behind me. He flicked his wrist, giving her a slight head shake, and she disappeared.
"What's wrong, Cross? Have you spoken to Jade?"
Jade. Shit. I need to use your phone.
"What?"
Your phone. I moved to the desk and picked up the receiver, checking for a dial tone before I punched in Jade's number. "I have to pick up a throwaway, but until then, I just need a few minutes. I have to make sure she's okay."
"Jade?"
My gaze shot to his face. "Who else?"
Hello?
Jade's voice filled me with relief. "Hi, it's me. It's Lucien. I just wanted to check on you. Are you at the apartment?"
Yes?
Okay, good. Stay there. Keep the doors locked. I'll be by soon."
What's wrong? What's going on?
She asked. "Nothing. Everything's fine. We'll discuss what happened in court today and work on devising our next steps, okay? Stay put."
Yeah, okay.
She replied, bewildered. I hung up, taking my first full breath since Renwyn walked into my office. Almeida poured a drink and placed the glass on the desk beside me.
"Sit down and tell me what's going on."
So I did. He's on to me. I don't know how. Almeida snorted.
"Take your pick. He could have made you at the airport, or someone at the precinct said something to the wrong person, or Jade looked you up on Scott's computer."
She said she didn't.
Clients aren't always completely honest.
It doesn't matter. What matters is Scott knows. What happened in court?
Mr. Renwyn denied the claims. He showed up, calm and rational. He spoke eloquently. He was polite to Jade. He didn't do anything the judge would construe as threatening. He didn't try to approach her, argue with her, or do any of the things most people in this situation do. She came off emotional and unstable. He looked like a fucking Boy Scout.
A stoned Boy Scout. Almeida shrugged.
It doesn't matter. The judge listened to Ms. McNamara's story and erred on the side of caution. I didn't present any of the evidence we obtained. I don't want the other side to get wind of what we have in the event we need to use it to get a permanent restraining order.
Smart thinking. We'll probably need it. Scott's angry, and it'll only get worse once the police department receives official notice. Jade can't stay in that apartment. Scott knows I helped her. He'll use that information to track her down. I scowled. He wants to use me to find her. That's why he stopped by the office. He thought he could bribe me, and when that didn't work, he figured he'd intimidate me, and I'd take him right to her.
It's a good thing he underestimated you. I can arrange for temporary housing while you figure this out.
Good. Almeida picked up the phone and made a few calls. My thoughts drifted to Sarah and the officer guarding the records room. I didn't think Sarah would betray me, but who knows what she might have said if someone questioned why she was digging through Renwyn's files. And the officer in the records room easily could have run his mouth. Then again, the waitress or bartender at KC's might have tipped off Scott. This wasn't good. I already bumbled my first private investigator gig, and now I had to figure out how to get it back on track. I promised Jade I'd keep her safe, and I was a man of my word. I just had to find a way to keep my promise. Chapter 19.
Lucien, I don't understand. Why do I have to leave? What's going on?
It's just a precaution. Mr. Almeida and I want to keep you safe. She stared into my eyes.
Scott knows. He found me.
No.
Don't lie to me.
I'm not. Searching my face for answers, she said,
I know that look. I'm used to seeing it staring back at me in the mirror. What did he do? I know he did something. How bad is it?
Suddenly parched, I licked my lips and cleared my throat. He found the tracker I placed on his truck and came to my office to return it.
Does he know where I am?
I shook my head and peered out the window. Not yet. That's why we need to move you. Her eyes grew even wider.
What's he going to do to you?
He can't do anything to me. Don't worry, I just want to keep you safe. Since the apartment is registered under one of my LLCs, there's a small chance he could discover it if he digs deep enough. So we'll move you before that happens. Reeves and Almeida keep a few apartments in the city for their out-of-town clients. They're much nicer than this dump. You'll be safe there. She looked around the barely furnished apartment.
Okay.
It didn't take Jade long to pack her things. When she was done, I went outside and hailed a cab. After helping the cabbie load her luggage into the car, I paid him and gave him her new address.
"You're not coming?"
she asked. "No, I have some things to take care of. Mr. Almeida will meet you at the apartment and help you get settled. You have my new number should anything arise." She nodded, though I could see she wanted to argue.
"You better call me tomorrow."
I grinned. "When did you get so bossy?"
"I'm serious."
"Okay." I opened the car door and waited for her to slide inside. "I'll talk to you tomorrow." Shutting the door, I tapped on the side of the cab and stared at the rental car. That was another waste, but I could use it in the interim while my car remained at the office. I trudged up the stairs and let myself back inside. Then I cleaned the apartment so no one would ever know Jade had been there. Unfortunately, I couldn't erase the memories of the 2 police officers who had knocked on the door the other morning, but they never got her name, so I didn't concern myself too much with that aspect of damage control. When I finished, I went to the nearest electronics store and stocked up on the basics. It took a couple of hours to jerry-rig the security system with the sensors and pinhole cameras I bought. After checking to make sure the wireless signal was strong and the footage was automatically backed up to my cloud drive, I left the apartment. If anyone dropped by the apartment, I would know about it. Should Scott discover this apartment, he'd stop by, just like my office, and the rest of the properties I rented or owned. He knew I had her, and he'd do anything to get her back. In the event he came after Jade, I wanted proof to bury him. On my way home, I couldn't help but notice every police car on the road. Call it paranoia or healthy observation, but until now, patrol cars had never made me nervous. Now they did. Shake it off, Cross. The last thing I needed was Scott Renwin getting in my head. I parked in my normal space and greeted the doorman. "Anything going on I should know about?"
"No, sir."
"Okay." I reached into my pocket, palming a few bills before extending my hand. We shook. "Should the police show up, I'd appreciate advance notice." He grinned, tucking the money into his pocket without looking at it.
"Now what have you done, Mr. Cross? Are you a wanted man?"
"Do you think I'd tell you if I was?" I grinned. "I'll leave the details up to your imagination."
"Very good, sir."
As soon as I stepped foot inside my apartment, I checked my security system. No one had entered or lurked in the hallways outside my door, not that I believed Scott could gain access to my building with anything less than a valid warrant, but I didn't intend to underestimate him. He found the tracker, and he'd been smart enough to sedate himself for court. Clearly he wasn't stupid, or as stupid as his face led me to believe. Even though my apartment, and the one I rented for Jade, remained secure, I had trouble sleeping that night. The conversation with Scott played on a loop in my head. Did he honestly think I'd give Jade up for a few bucks? Idly, I wondered what he planned to do when she went back to work. Based on our conversation, he seemed determined to violate the terms of the TRO the first chance he got, but Mr. Almeida believed that might be a knee-jerk reaction to the proceedings. Most people wanted to confront their accusers and, in the case of domestic abuse, knock some sense into them as well. The thought sickened me. Maybe tomorrow would be better, but I was wrong.